When investigators went back to the field, the ground told a story that matched the children exactly. And a botanist's report would later say no natural force could have done what was done to that grass. Welcome to Untold Lores. Part 3 of 4. Investigators had the children's drawings. They had Dr. Mack's filmed interviews and his formal written findings. They had the headmaster's account and the teacher's statements. What they did not yet have was physical evidence from the site itself. Evidence from the ground where the craft had reportedly landed. Cynthia Hind and a small team returned to the field beyond the school fence to examine the area. The ground in that section of the bush was dry and compacted, typical of the region in September. What they found was a roughly circular area where the grass and low scrub had been pressed flat in a consistent pattern radiating outward from a central point. The flattened area was measured. It matched the diameter that the majority of children had described for the craft. The pressed grass was not burned. It was not cut. It had been pushed down with force, and it had not recovered in the days since the event. The pattern was uniform enough that the investigators documented it as inconsistent with wind, animal movement, or a human acting alone. There was a second area of disturbed ground, smaller, roughly 2 meters from the main depression. The soil there had been displaced in a way that did not match the surrounding earth. It was examined but not formally tested at the time, which would later become a point of significant criticism from people reviewing the case. Hind photographed everything. The photographs exist in the documented record. Meanwhile, something was happening with the children that no one had fully tracked yet. In the weeks after the event, several of the children who had been closest to the fence began telling their parents about recurring images coming to them. Not dreams, they said, but waking pictures that arrived when they were not trying to think about anything in particular. Several children described the same image, a landscape that was gray and bare, with no trees, no animals, and a sky the wrong color. These reports were not gathered systematically at first. They emerged over time, in separate conversations, in separate homes, and only came to the attention of investigators months later when parents began contacting the school. When Dr. Mack learned of these reports, he returned to Zimbabwe for follow-up interviews. What he documented in those sessions was a pattern he described in his research as consistent with other contact accounts from around the world. Children and adults who had reported close encounters often described receiving images or impressions that recurred for months or years afterward, and that the content of those images was frequently environmental. Barren landscapes, dying ecosystems, a world diminished. The recurring images were not something the children had talked about among themselves. Several sets of parents confirmed that their children had kept the experiences private, not sharing them with school friends. Because, as one mother reported, her daughter had said she was afraid people would think she was making things up again. Now here is where the case takes a turn that investigators had not anticipated. When the follow-up interviews were cross-referenced with the original September accounts, researchers found a discrepancy that no one had caught in the first round of documentation. One child, not the 12-year-old girl, but a different child, a boy who had given a brief and unremarkable account in September, had said something in that first interview that had been recorded and then overlooked. In the original September interview, the boy had described a figure standing near the craft. Standard detail. Then, almost in passing, he had mentioned that the figure was holding something. A small object. He had described it as flat and dark, about the size of a hand, and said the figure had been looking at it before it noticed the children. No other child had mentioned this detail. At the time, it had been noted and set aside. But in the follow-up interviews, a different child, one who had not given any account in September beyond saying she had seen the craft and run, now said, months later without any prompting, that she had seen one of the figures holding something small. She described it as flat and dark, about the size of a hand, 2 children, different ages, different positions along the fence, one account in September, one account in the follow-up months later, the same unremarked detail. Neither child had spoken to the other in the intervening months. Their parents confirmed this. The investigators documented the match. They had no explanation for it. And then the ground evidence was revisited. The photographs that Hind had taken of the flattened grass area were sent to a botanist for review. The botanist's finding, later published in Hind's documentation, stated that the pattern of flattening was not consistent with any natural cause the botanist could identify. The force that had pressed the grass down had come from above, evenly across the entire circular area, simultaneously, not rolled, not dragged, pressed straight down from above all at once. The botanist's report said the grass had been pressed down from above across the entire circle, all at once, evenly, simultaneously. No natural cause could be identified. No mechanism existed for that to happen the way it had happened. That's it for part 3. Follow Untold Lores for part 4. Like and subscribe for daily stories.